All right. Well, welcome back to Builders, Makers, Doers. I'm Andy Bassett. I'm running solo today. Elliot's not here with me, but that's all right. We'll get through this. Excited for today. Here with Doug McCune from Puetz Design+Build out of South Dakota. Really cool company doing really cool things. Been around a long time, learned a lot, I think, through that time. So that's what we'll talk about today, and we'll build off that. Doug, what's up? How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing good, doing good. Thanks for joining us here. Excited to kind of dive into this and see where the conversation takes us. As I said in the intro, Elliot is not here with me today, so I get to run it solo and we get to just have a conversation. How's that sound?
Sounds great.
Perfect. Well, before we dive in, you guys have been around a while, operating, just north of where I sit here in Omaha, up in the great state of South Dakota. But maybe just, for the audience, give us the little bit of history on the company, you yourself, kind of what you guys are all about.
Sure. Well, Puetz Design+Build's been in business for 74 years now. Originally headquartered in Mitchell, South Dakota. That's still our home office location. We now have branch offices in Sioux Falls and in Pierre. So we cover all of eastern South Dakota, northern Nebraska, southwest Minnesota, Iowa, and then southern North Dakota. We are a design build contractor, but we're pretty unique in how we handle our clients. We work in a lot of rural markets, so we handle about every delivery method there is out there. We have architects on staff and a full architectural design staff, including interior design. So they operate as their own entity. We do architecture only projects. We do design build, hence the name. We do a lot of general contracting. Most of our volume is in the construction management realm, where I act as a construction manager on both public and private projects. We self-perform concrete, carpentry, frame to finish, all of our own steel and precast erection. And we also do custom crane work. We have a fleet of 4 cranes, so we'll do custom work for one-offs and public and private clients. So we're about 94 employees deep right now. Typically hover between that 90 to 100 mark between the 3 offices. 67 to 68 right now, of which are field staff, trade staff, and made up of a kind of a diverse employee group. We've got a wide age range of mix in the office and in the field, from a few recent college grads, and we recently had our longest tenured employee retire with 45 years in.
Wow.
We've got a lot of solid base in the office of 30-year plus people. So this is my 17th year with Puetz Design+Build. Awesome. I started as a superintendent with them. My background is started working construction when I was 18, worked all through college. So started as a laborer, worked out of the Sioux Falls market for the first 14 years of my career as a laborer, carpenter. Then I got pretty heavy into structure, was a certified welder, ran steel and precast erection crews, and then started running work as a superintendent and doing some project management. When I went to Puetz, I was the superintendent, eventually took over operations, and this is my second year as president. Puetz is a 3rd-generation company. The Puetz family still retains a little bit of minority ownership, but they're not active in the business anymore. So I have 5 other partners that retain some ownership in the business, and we run the day-to-day.
There you go. I love it. That's a great background, not only on the company, but you as well. So I think one thing I want to ask about right out of the gate, because you mentioned, been around 74 years, a long time, generations in the family and all that. But one thing you mentioned was, there's a lot of different ways you guys go about approaching the market, different, ways you can engage in, different projects. I imagine that has evolved over time from what the company was, originally. Can you maybe just walk through the path of how you kind of landed on just going into the different spaces or different ways of engaging different projects?
Sure. So originally, Puetz was a straight up hard bid general contractor.
Okay.
Clarence Puetz started the business. That was the business model for years. His son Wayne Puetz came into the business in the early 80s, and then late 90s, early 2000s, they brought architecture into the mix.
Okay.
Particularly just as a design build contractor, because a lot of the rural communities and smaller clients had that need, particularly on on privately funded work. And, prior to about 8 years ago, in the state of South Dakota, you could act as the architect and the general contractor, construction manager on publicly funded projects. That law has since changed, so now you can't perform both services, but for quite a few years you could. The architecture staff kept growing over time and eventually, became an entity that was able to perform outside of design build. Currently they do quite a bit of work with state of South Dakota, the DOT, and other private and public clients. And then, when I came on board, when I started there, I would say that the largest driver of the business book and the volume was design build work. But I would say annual volume back in 2010 for the company was between 12 and 15 million. Okay. Usually about 6 to 7 projects at a time, about 20 field staff. And then, we've experienced some really good growth since I've been there. We started, with my background in larger projects and specifically structure, decided, the ownership group at the time decided to give me some rope and, started buying larger cranes, doing larger projects. And, when I took over as operations manager, really just took the next step there, got the office opened up in Pierre, opened up in Sioux Falls, purchased a couple more cranes, tripled the size of our field crews, and really got a lot heavier into the construction management realm and also into, erection. That's the only service that we perform as a subcontractor. We're a PCI certified erector. So we go set panels for any client, other general contractors, other construction managers, and steel erection as well. So, I came from the field, and, that was my vision to drive it. And the ownership group at the time really let me kind of take that vision and make it a reality, and gave me a lot of rope in doing so, put a lot of trust in me, particularly with open up the Sioux Falls office location. So, I went to work for Puetz because, I'd worked for larger contractors in the Sioux Falls market, but just fell in love with the people, work with great people every day, made a lot of great relationships. Yeah. Right now I'm in between meetings today, so I'm actually sitting in a subcontractor partner's office, borrowing his office.
Nice. I love it.
Those relationships you make along the way are invaluable.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, and I'll want to circle back to people because I know you have great people, and that's one of I think the challenges a lot of any business owner, but certainly in the trades feel is, how we do get and attract and build a culture around retaining people. So we'll get to that in a minute. One question though I want to ask, I think, is, so that journey to, I'll call it diversification for lack of better terms, but that journey to kind of the diversification that you guys have today came through, you saw needs in the market, so you took the opportunity to approach it, or you had certain expertise with you or others that kind of brought that opportunity to pursue. What does that mean today? Because there's a lot of people watching this, I think, are thinking about, whatever diversifying their company means to them. They're probably thinking about doing it. But I guess my question is, having done that over time, what does that mean for the company today with that diversification? Does it protect the company when certain segments are, having challenges and others, you can lean into, or does it create problems? Does it create challenges with just, different, spreading ourselves, quote unquote, thin and different things? Or how do you look at it today, I guess, is maybe the ultimate question, that diversification that's kind of developed over years?
Sure. Well, growth is always challenging, right? Especially when you're, getting into new market segments or market areas, or, performing tasks that you haven't before. But for us, it was important really, to financially insulate us against, market trends that are out of our control.
Yep.
And specifically, the downturn in the market back in 08, 09, I think it opened a lot of people's eyes in the area. We're fortunate in our area. Sioux Falls has always had a bit of a self-sustaining economy. And Puetz wasn't doing a lot of business in Sioux Falls, but that downturn that was in the larger metros, your Minneapolis's, Omaha's, it didn't affect South Dakota as much in the commercial side. On the residential side, it did, but At that time, that was prior to my employment at Pitts, but that's when they really were able to build the architecture staff, because they were getting a lot of candidates looking to move out of that larger metro area and into the smaller rural markets. But, for us today, it's all about, making sure that we can sustain our profitability and provide a place for our employees that they feel comfortable being for their whole career.
Yeah.
It might be a little slower on the architecture side one year, but at the end of the day, we're all one company. So, the construction side may make up for that, and vice versa. And with the subcontracting side, that has its ups and downs. Historically, I have a crew that does nothing but set precast panels. But this year, obviously, we do it on our own projects, but they travel a lot as a subcontractor. But this year, with a lot of the large data centers in the region, particularly North Dakota, there's only so many precast producers, so that side of the business is slowed down, because that product is all going to one or two large projects. But when we have other avenues to stay profitable and productive, and an employee group like we have that's very diverse, that most of our field staff obviously are talented more in one area than the other, but they can pivot. Some of our best carpenters also are certified welders.
Yeah.
And our crane operators, if they're not in the seat operating a crane, they're going to be out working with the rest of the crew. So we've tried to really create that environment over the year to, stay profitable, stay competitive in the market. And most of all, our goal as a company is to, we're built on people. We always have been, and that'll never change, is, to make sure that we have a place where they're comfortable to work their whole career, that we can provide them with a good salary. Insurance is huge in our industry. Give them an insurance package that is affordable for them. And then, if there are increases, that we weather those hits as a company and don't pass it on to the employee.
I love it. Yeah, so we can kind of segment into that. But what I like about how you answered the question I asked, which is what I anticipated, is that, the areas that you guys have grown into are obviously supportive of one another. We see some people that look at the diversification of a business and they go chase something that's way outside of, their expertise otherwise, and that can create challenges. But that's not the case with you guys. But what I like what you said is the supportive business units or whatever, if one has, a downturn, or there's, just less opportunity, others pick it up, and the company as a whole leans into that, so that, you're all supporting one another. And I love that, because, that's what it's all about. And you also mentioned, running a profitable company, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we've got to do, is figure out how we run a profitable company so we can sustain, whatever's going on economically, and provide, that environment, that atmosphere for our team, for our communities, for all the stakeholders in the business. So I love the way you answered that. And it's exactly what I anticipated you would. But I think people that listen to this can say, all right, I see how those pieces can fit together when we expand our company, but we do it within, things that are adjacent to the model we already have that can support it. So I love that. Thanks for that. So let's shift to the people piece, because I know in the work we do with you guys on the operating company side of things, for us, you have great people. You do. And that is key. And I think the challenge for sure, specifically for people in the trades at any level, but early on, is how the heck do you go out and find good people? How do you keep good people? How do you build a culture that gets people wanting to come, wanting to do the things? Because we know there's some days are really hard, right? There's challenges that approach us every day. But, how do you guys go about it? So maybe the question is, let's start with, how are you attracting people? Like, what's the key there to go out and find new talent?
Well, obviously for any company, particularly in our region, that's what limits everybody's growth, is available employees and retention of those employees. Part of the thought process behind the Sioux Falls market expansion was, obviously Sioux Falls is the largest city in the state, so there's going to be more work there. But that's also where particularly the younger people coming in the industry would rather live. Mitchell's only 65 miles away from Sioux Falls, but you get to Mitchell and Pierre, and it's almost like you're a little bit on an island. And, younger people want to live around where there's more action. So,
Yep.
that was a big tool for us in recruitment. I'm deeply involved with most of the universities and tech schools in the area. We offer scholarships. I'm on several advisory boards, really getting young people our message out early while they're, maybe even freshman level in college, or,
Yep.
even right in high school, bringing them in, doing internships. We work through a lot of summer programs with the AGC and with Southeast Tech in Sioux Falls, exposing them to our business and our process, maybe helping them get rid of that stigma or preconceived notion that, we're just a bunch of hammer swingers. Really showing them that, we're professionals.
Yep.
We really are dedicated to what we do. And, I can't remember a time when the market slowed enough where there were a lot of layoffs.
Yeah.
I don't think Pitts has had a layoff since 1988, I believe.
That's amazing.
And I think a lot of people think, they always had that notion that it's seasonal, which it's not. A lot of years our busiest time is during the winter, and really showing them that, okay, our benefit package and our compensation really rivals any industry, and showing them that it's a spot where they can grow in a career, have opportunities to advance, and be, spend their whole career in one spot if they choose to.
Yeah, I love that. And I think what's key that you said there is, as the leader of the organization, you're out spending your time going to these organizations, being involved, getting in front of young people, sharing the story and getting them interested. Because I think that is such it is a constant theme, not only with clients we work with at Ellerbrock, but in, these conversations in the podcast, is trying to get young people attracted, to the trades. And it's interesting to watch the evolution, right? We all know the tech side of things and AI and how sexy that's been for kids. And, that's shifting a little bit with some of that, and so I think, getting people to understand, how important a business like yours is for our communities to thrive and survive. And I think when they see that, and they see the opportunity to grow into a company and have a career and look at it that way, you can really shift that mentality. So kudos to you for that. I think that would be the big takeaway for people listening, is get out, get in front of young people and share the story and get them excited. And then, the rest kind of falls into place. So, all right. So you mentioned, the compensation structure, good benefits as being key tools to keep people. But beyond that, maybe just briefly touch on, because I know you guys have it, touch on the culture in the organization and how important that is in keeping people long-term. Like when you mentioned, people making a career out of it, obviously being paid well, getting good benefits is really important. But at the end of the day, people want to work for a company that they believe in. They see the vision, they can get behind the culture. That's really a huge tool that keeps people. So maybe just walk through what that means to you and your company,
Sure.
as far as, keeping people for a career.
I think the biggest thing that we do, and most important thing that we do, is we're built around, our leadership group specifically is built of people who have physically done the work. And when I say physically, it's very rare for us to hire a position outside of the company in the trade side of things where they don't do some time for us in the field.
I love that.
We are not stuffy people. We're not big on titles. Obviously, we have some titles, but we make it a point to engage all of our employees anytime we see them, which may seem pretty trivial, but I know every employee by name. I probably know way too much about them, and I like it that way.
Yeah.
We always hear people say their company is a family, and some people think that's a bad thing, but we don't necessarily do. We really like bringing in younger people and pairing them up with older staff. We have an apprenticeship program and a mentorship program, and we make it a point to have our people out in the field on the job sites too. Last year I spent a week out working on a job site. Yes, I cried for the week after and took a lot of Advil, but it's kind of, yeah. And I think it really makes people understand that, if you're willing to do just about anything and willing to do what they do in a day out, and you understand, the challenges they have as an employee,
Yep.
then, that they're going to perform like it's their own business. I mean, I think that's really the key is when you have a good company culture and people know that their coworkers are looking out for them, they begin to perform and behave like your business is their business. And then usually that comes with an understanding that with high performance comes rewards, and we reward our employees, whether, through our benefits and monetarily. And, I wouldn't say we're ultra aggressive. We're fairly conservative financially in the fact that, we keep a lot of money in the company for bonding capacity and for those rainy days that are going to come sooner or later. But our priority is to take care of our employees. When we close the books at the end of the year, that's priority number one. First thing we do is, okay, what are our health insurance premiums, and are there any financial impacts to the benefit package? And as a company, what are we doing to make sure that's not passed on to the employees?
I love that. That's awesome. Well, it's certainly a sentiment we share when we're engaged in that side of the things with our clients on the operating side, because that's exactly what it's all about. So I love that. Okay, so let's talk about 17 years at the company, right? That's correct. Yep. 17 years at the company. If you were to try to identify maybe a challenge in those, like is there a single big kind of moment or challenge that comes to mind that you had to overcome or the company had to overcome in that time? I mean, you already mentioned, kind of 08, 09, that time frame, but is there anything in particular that, the audience could glean that you learned from a specific challenge that happened during your time? I mean, I know challenges arise every day, but does one come to mind?
Yes, I think it was probably about 2017 or 18. We had a kind of an anomaly. We had a lot of negotiated work going into that year. So we kind of pulled back actively bidding and seeking out more work. And we had several large projects that the financing fell through at the last moment. So all of a sudden we had, about $40 or $50 million in volume we needed to make up in a quick hurry.
Oh, wow.
And prior to that, we still bid work in the, as a general contractor in the hard bid market competitively, but it was here and there. And, we pivoted very quickly and we went out in the open market and just started grabbing work. And when anybody that bids work as a GC, when you're bidding against 14 to 16 people and trying to figure out your advantage, stay profitable, and make all the parts and pieces work, it's a big undertaking. At the time we only had one dedicated estimator. I jumped in, a couple other people jumped in to help, and we were able to get through that, open up a lot of doors in that market, get exposed to a lot of new subcontractors that we hadn't been working with prior to that. And I think that really spurred some growth beyond that.
Wow. Yeah.
Because, you got to trust your people. And it really showed us, and me in particular, like sometimes you never want to put somebody in a position where they may not succeed, but you have to take those risks with your employees sometimes, support them, give them the opportunity to show you what they're really capable of. And, it's a testament to our employee group. We've got great people, and, everybody jumped in and got after it. And then, it made things like the Sioux Falls expansion and some growth into bigger projects and bigger markets not seem so intimidating after that. We figured out we can tackle this and get through it. Why not take the next step and take on the next challenge?
Yeah, well, that's
hiccups along the way, but it gives you some confidence. And when you see, when you see how your people perform, and when they have that vested interest in the company's success as if it was their own, it really empowers you to take more risks.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you're comfortable taking those risks, right? More comfortable anyway. Yeah. That's, I think what's fascinating about the story you just told is not only how you overcame that particular scenario or situation, but then the opportunity that kind of maybe unintentionally came out of it on the backside with developing some new relationships, figuring out that you could get more comfortable taking risk because you were able to get through that. I mean, talk about learning in the moment, but that takes having, I mean, a piece of it is we talked about kind of early on is, you had already diversified the company to where you were able to, reposition back into a more bid mentality when that scenario presented itself to you. So yeah, that's awesome. I think there's a lot, again, that people that'll listen or watch this can grab out of that. So very cool. Thanks for sharing that. All right. So that was a challenge I asked about. On the flip side of that, if you look back over the 17 years, is there a specific, could be a project, could be a moment, could be just something around the company that you've been involved in that you're like most proud of? Is there a particular success or moment or theme or idea or thing that makes you the most proud in those 17 years?
I think maybe not one project or thing in particular, but I think in the last 7 to 8 years, for me, it's been rewarding to watch our employees take on new challenges and be ultra successful at them. Now now we have estimating capacity like we never had before. We bid, in the last 2 years, we've bid more work than we had in the 7 years prior.
Wow.
On the erection side of the business, getting into that market, becoming a PCI certified firm, and going from erecting a few panels on our job sites and setting smaller buildings into taking on massive structures, traveling all over, and really watching some of the guys that were superintendents when I first started move up into leadership roles and taking that step much quicker than I anticipated, and just grabbing it with both hands. And I think there's always something to be said for years of experience in the field, actually physically doing the work and driving it. It makes that transition a lot easier. But watching them take that knowledge of years of working in the field, bringing it into the office, and really giving a boost to the office staff with, how to be more efficient about how we run things. Teaching the younger group that we're bringing in, and really, being a good sounding board for them. We're big on communication, but sometimes there's a gap. Obviously, the younger generation communicates differently, and they have a different experience than a lot of us did when we first started in the trades, and you just got yelled at every day. And watching how they've been able to mold our younger employee group. We've got one gentleman with us that's in his 70s, and he's one of the most tech savvy people I've ever met, and I really enjoy watching him teach younger assistant PMs and assistant superintendents the tricks of the trade, the means and methods, and how he communicates to them and how quickly they pick up on it. Those kind of people are really going to be missed, and we're trying to continue building that base, so we always have somebody in that position to mentor that younger group coming in.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I guess on that, you mentioned earlier, we talked about the company's been around for over 70 years, 3 generations of family, and then under your leadership now, you're also talking about bringing young people in and watching them grow. What does the next 5-10 years look like for Puetz? Is there anything big on the horizon? Any other areas that you guys are kind of contemplating, or is it, we're going to continue to do things as we are and take opportunities as they come, or maybe just walk through how you look forward to, build planning for the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years?
Sure. Well, last year we brought in more partners in the business.
Yep.
A diverse group of younger and older, but particularly two of the partners we brought in are in their 30s. They're younger and have moved into some leadership roles. As far as the company growth, conservative growth is always where we want to be. I'm looking at another large crane purchase, bigger machine, which means bigger buildings, probably some new markets, that we have shied away from in the past. As an erector, sometimes we'll shy away from large wastewater water treatment plants for erection just because of the size of the machines we have and the logistics of that. So, I've always thought about getting into some bridge work, which is probably on the horizon. I might dabble with that a little bit, and really expanding our market presence in Sioux Falls. With that being the largest market in South Dakota, there's obviously more opportunity there than in the rural communities, and really staying ahead of things. Historically, we've been one of the major players in the state in the school market. We've done 450 some school projects over the last 20 years.
Wow.
And that's pretty cyclical. Post COVID, everybody got some money, they needed to spend it, and you spend a short time, everybody was adding on. But your average rural school district, they're not doing a project every year. It might be every 5 or 10. So really looking for other ways to fill those gaps in between with other types of projects and new clients. And a goal of mine is to just keep building our architecture staff and keep strengthening that presence, because we do more and more architecture only projects all the time, and just to not only solidify that foothold in all the markets, but specifically in the Sioux Falls area.
Yeah. Well, and it's for those that are listening or watching and don't know, Sioux Falls is definitely a very cool community, very cool city. There is a lot of growth. I actually was just up there not all that long ago overnight. It'd been a while since I'd been in the downtown area, and man alive, there has been a lot of action and activity there. So yeah, certainly opportunity. But I love that, kind of what you mentioned there, and we're probably getting close to time, so we'll wrap soon. But what you had mentioned there was, you brought young people in, not only as partners, but you've got young leaders, you've got talent there that's looking for the future, looking toward the future. You're building a company, building a base, building a foundation that allows the company to last long into the future and be a legacy company, which is really cool, because I think we see this across all industries, but very specifically in the trades. I think it's hard sometimes for people to kind of take their head out of the work every day and work on the business a little bit and kind of figure out how do we structure things so that we can A, take advantage of opportunities as they approach, and B, position this company to be around for the long haul. And if you're not thinking through that, regardless of what stage you're at in the business, it can sneak up on you in a hurry. And if a plan's not there, we all kind of know what can happen then. So kudos to you and team for thinking through that, getting the right pieces of the puzzle in place. And then to your point, you have these other opportunities, whether it's bridge work or expanding the architecture side, that when you've got that foundation in place, it allows you to go approach and pursue those things as they make sense. So yeah, very cool for that. We're getting right up on time. I guess before we wrap, anything else that you'd like to add or make sense, or any words of wisdom to those that are in the trades and looking to, grow a business and see the success like you guys have? Because, I think a lot of people, as they get in early and they hear a story like this, they're like, yeah, that's the kind of company, I want to build and become. So I don't know, any parting wisdom you'd give the audience?
Maybe just a couple things. There's no substitute for doing the work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of flashy things in the market, AI being one of them. But, at the end of the day, you do the work, you're going to get rewarded. And then, what I tell all of, particularly the field staff and even the project management staff, mistakes are going to happen. Mistakes aren't a bad thing. If you're not making mistakes, then you're not thinking outside the box or trying anything new. Mistakes are only bad if you continue to repeat them and you don't learn from them. But I'm pretty candid with the field guys that, the reason why I think I'm good at my job is because I've screwed up about everything. I just figured out how to fix it.
Yeah. I love that. Couldn't have said it better. If you're not making mistakes, you're not learning. The question is, are you learning from them, and how you move forward? And then having, leading where people can be comfortable knowing that that's exactly how the business looks at it, is let's go out, try things. Let's take some risks where it makes sense. If we make a mistake, let's learn from it and move on. And so that's awesome. Appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's great words of wisdom to those that are out trying to build something like you guys have. So at that, we'll probably wrap up. Doug, it was fun. I appreciate you coming on. These 35 plus minutes go by real quick.
Yeah,
but
I do.
Yeah,
Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, those of you that listened, there's a lot of good things to take away from this, because Doug and team have built an incredible company, and you should go check them out. You should follow them, see what they're doing, because they're doing some cool things. But at that, Doug, we'll wrap. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
All right.